Okay, I am recording this, and we have quite a few people accept this. The most important ones are some folks from Optimex, anybody from the Spinnaker side, as well as Armory.
Interesting.
And then, of course,
this is Gopinath Revala from Optimex.
Hi, Gopi. So glad that you could attend. And then I know that the folks from Intuit, Henrik is probably going to be late. I'm recording this for them. We may have to follow up with him on another call, but this is at least a good starting point for a discussion around what is being called application sets. Is there somebody here from Armory yet? Nope. Isaac promised me somebody would be, so we'll just hang on here, 12:02, before we get started. And for all of the Ortelius folks that are on the call, just while we're waiting, the CD Foundation is having their CDCon 2021 in June 23rd and the 24th. It will be, of course, virtual again this year. Ortelius will have some speaking slots, so please reach out to me if you'd like to speak. And I'm going to send everybody the link again to make sure you guys are aware that you can submit talks on Ortelius for CDCon.
Do you know when the call for papers closes? Like at the end of February?
I don't off the top of my head. I think it's maybe the end of February. And Henrik is here. Henrik from Intuit. Thank you so much. I know this was a hard time for you to make, so I super appreciate that you made the effort.
Yeah, I'm in the car, so I'll mostly listen in as I try to make my way back home.
That is totally fine. We can handle people in the car. It's not an issue. So let me just level set why this discussion came about. It's been probably 6 or 8 months ago that we were on a call with the Netflix folks, and they were talking about the need for collecting a group of microservices together that are not loosely coupled. They like to call it, initially they called it the application with a small a, so that they could deploy those as a unit. They wanted to know if we could track relationships between those and lock those together in a deployment, and then track who's consuming that set of microservices. And some of my kind of snooping around with Argo, I noticed that Argo was talking about application sets, and the Argo folks sent over to the Ortelius team some very interesting webinar or information about what Argo is doing around what they call application sets. And it turns out that those are very similar. So what I had hoped to do with this group is to bring everybody together to acknowledge that there is a specific issue here that Argo is trying to solve, that Spinnaker may be trying to solve, and where Ortelius, the open source project that's now part of the CD Foundation, could potentially step in and do that configuration management and pass it off regardless of what deployment solution anybody is using. And so that's how this conversation begun. Steve, would you like to add to that in any way?
Just the one thing that we have noticed is that there's, even though in the microservice world, microservices are supposed to be independently deployable and basically have their own like workflow or pipeline to get from a developer change, get check-in all the way out to production. That loosely coupledness doesn't always apply, and that there is a need for tightly coupling a set of versions of some services together into a set. And that's one of the things Netflix brought up when we were talking to them. And that's kind of where we've been trying to wrap our heads around how other deployment tools are viewing this problem space of microservices on their own, but also microservices that need to be tightly coupled and how they roll up into a logical view of an application. One of the things that we recognize is that the concept of an application where we deploy an ear file out to WebSphere, for example, is being replaced with deploying 100 microservices out that represent that same ear file. For example, I just was talking to a company yesterday, a gaming company out of Israel, and they have 100 microservices. That's a core set of them are shared across 15 different application teams. So that's kind of like what we're running into more and more these days. So that's kind of the trying to level set what we've seen as the use case that we're trying to understand.
So, Henrik, I know you're driving, but would you mind giving us a kind of an overview of how Argo and Intuit and then Argo sees an application set and what that is? Just so we can be on this, make sure we're on the same sheet of music, so to speak.
I can speak for Henrik if it's too distracting for him to drive.
Yeah, I was gonna say I might pass that ball over to Jesse maybe.
Okay.
Yeah. So hi, I'm Jesse. I'm one of the Argo maintainers, and back in May last year, so we've actually had the concept of an application since the inception of ArgoCD. That's one of the CRDs that represents a collection of Kubernetes resources. So to us, an application is actually just a pointer to a location of a set of manifest definitions, whether that is a Helm chart or whether that's a path inside the Git repository. So the application is already been kind of well conceived and has been working. The next level of the application set that we introduced in May of last year was we found the need to have a higher level grouping, logical grouping of applications under an umbrella called the application set. And so the application set can be, there's several use cases that we see. The first was that we wanted to group and deploy applications as a unit where we're deploying across clusters. So maybe like a controller goes into 100 different clusters. And so when I want to make a change to that, I update the application set, and 100 controllers are automatically updated because they're part of the set. There's kind of on the other side of the use case where it's not homogeneous. There's, let's say you have a Git repo, and every directory of that Git repo is some component of a higher level application. But those individual repos are maybe maintained by separate teams. And so each team can contribute to their own path inside that Git repo, but as a whole, as they make changes, the set can deploy their unit, the application, individually as they update their repo.
So in your case, let's say, I have a microservice in my repo, and in that repo is my Helm chart, for example, living in that repo, or is it living in the application set repo?
So actually, there's no application set repo. What our application set is actually a generator of applications. So the pointer to repos are always in the application, and the application set defines how to generate the definition of application. So that generator concept is like iterate a Git repository, or traverse a Git repository and discover stuff, or maybe it gets it from some other source. But the
so
yeah, the application set itself doesn't have a.
So the application set is a pointer to a collection of applications then, and each application would live in its own Git repo.
Not necessarily that last part that you said. Because the set is templatized, it's actually up to the user how the child apps are generated. So it might be in the same repo, but not strictly.
Do you mind, Jesse, if I add a little bit more details? Okay, Alex here. I'm another maintainer of Argo. I just wanted to clarify that application set basically adds no functionality, nothing new to ArgoCD. Everything can be done using applications, but the problem is that people have to create applications manually right now, and we identified a set of patterns which repeated frequently. It's a very common case where people want to create an application per cluster or application per folder in repository. And so application set simply makes it easier, kind of.
Okay, so it's more of a templating, a way to separate some cluster, I'll just say some cluster data from the application itself.
Exactly, yes. And people started from, so we have so-called app of apps pattern. So application, ArgoCD application is a CRD. So technically you can create it manually in Kubernetes using kubectl apply, as well as you can create Helm chart, and Helm chart creates applications. And then you can create application which points to a Helm chart which will create applications. But the problem is you still need to maintain that Helm chart and application set, because application set, it's not trying to be another templating language. It's focused on specific use cases. That's why it is a little easier than Helm chart. But options are you can manually run kubectl applies and create applications, or you can use Helm and generate a bunch of applications. And application set supposed to be the most convenient way because it solves like particular use cases.
Okay. Now, do you represent, and this is a question for the Spinnaker guy, the Armory and OptimX, are you representing a logical collection of applications anywhere in your tools?
Over the years, we've made a couple of stabs at that. Internal to Netflix, they've been somewhat adopted, but not well enough for us to kind of continue that. So at this point, we're kind of looking for we're still looking for alternatives. So we've called them projects in like historical Spinnaker terminology, and it's been kind of logical groupings of applications, but it's been more for the visibility of applications and their dependencies and then various resources and their deployment strategies. What we struggle and the challenges we need to tackle is the grouping the definitions of their requirements, so that say a service owner like myself, we own Spinnaker. Spinnaker itself is 10 or 15 applications at Netflix, and we don't want to have to deal with the individual aspects of the applications. Like we want to say, hey, we want Spinnaker in this account or this region, and we don't want to have to specify things down to the granularity of every single like individual microservice. And that's kind of the challenge that we're facing right now.
Okay.
Yeah, so I also think of this is Gopinath, OptimX. We also see the application concept as a group of these services, right? One of the use cases I think we're discussing here is you have different environments. You want to have one environment promoted to another environment with certain number of services that go together. So that's again a one grouping of the services that are going with it and the configuration part of it. So right now, the Spinnaker we don't have built in. This is something that, of course, being thought through. It is generally done at a next level, one more layer on top of current Spinnaker application set.
Okay. All right.
So Jesse and
yeah, go ahead.
So like when you mean application, do you mean a set of microservices that make an application, or like an application as a single microservice?
Application is set of microservices. The way the Spinnaker is designed for the DevOps, individual services, continuous delivery, right? But we also support for Kubernetes kind of environments. You have an application defined through Helm charts or customized packages. Those can be deployed too. So the collection of those together is what you categorize as application.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
But in Jesse, in your world, an application is a group of Kubernetes manifests, correct? So that collection of manifests could be multiple containers, each representing their own microservice.
It could be. It's up to the end user what they decide an application is.
Okay.
So it could be typically, like in the simplest of cases, it's a deployment, ingress, and service, and like a config map. That's like probably the simplest. I mean, it could be just a deployment too, but
Right, but typically it'd be like you said, the service, the deployment plus any config map is that manifest is what is considered an application.
right. That's an application, and then the application set. Our concept of application set is a higher level object on top of applications, because basically in ArgoCD, this the smallest deployable unit is an application. So that's what you deploy as a unit. A set is helps you assist with the automation of deploying all of those units.
Right. I know there's another open source project out there from IBM called Razor that is addressing it the similar way that you guys are for Argo, with being able to manage a deployment across hundreds of clusters, and passing in data at dynamically doing that at deployment time. Now, and on the Spinnaker side, what is your smallest deployable unit that you typically work with?
Basically, I mean, it's very similar. VM or a container would be the smallest deployable artifact, and an application is typically single service and supporting infrastructure and resources. But again, similar to what Jesse described there, it's up to the implementer. If you want to have multiple containers or you want to do multiple VM deployments inside your application kind of boundaries, we don't we allow that. That's fine.
Right.
Yeah, think of the Spinnaker as more like a orchestration platform also, right? And the deploy is one step in it. In the deploy stage, you could be deploying one container manifest, or you can be deploying a Helm chart entirely, or it could be one VM. So that you can have this pipeline configuration that orchestrates your steps to get there.
Now, would at the orchestration layer, would that be, let's say I have my web front end, my website, and that website is running on top of 10 containers, and I want to deploy my website, and when I go to do that, is it going to be grouped together, those container deployments to Kubernetes going to be done at the workflow level, or are you going to have a separate workflow for each one of those individual containers?
It's up to the user. So if you have a Helm package that's deploying all 10 containers, they could do it that way. But typically on a continuous delivery mechanism, right, you would be doing one resource at a time, assuming there's no other dependencies for it. And you can choose to do blue, green, or canary, and then rolling update on top of it. So it's up to the user to figure out what would be the right thing for them in that case. But if in the context that we are looking at applications, and if you're saying, I want to promote my application in its entirety, that would be a situation where you would consider not individual microservice, but your entire application as something that's deployable, promotable to different environments. I think that's a construct that you would use at a higher level than the smallest possible container deployment.
And is there a view of that construct that you just described in Spinnaker?
You mean for the container?
Spinnaker. Let's say, you know, in the view where I want to deploy all 10 containers at once to, like, I'm promoting 10 containers from dev to QA, or moving it from dev to QA. What does the representation look like in Spinnaker of that grouping?
So one structure you can think of is a Helm chart, right? They have a bunch of these manifests that you are deploying. It doesn't have to be Helm charts. It's a set of manifests that represent your application that you're deploying. So you have these constructs of this pipeline that allow you to deploy using a deploy stage. And then once they are deployed, the application state is reflected. We have the cluster view or application cluster view, where you could go and see what's currently deployed, what are the state of each one of the services that you're running there.
Okay. So in your scenario, if I wanted to deploy 10 different, I wanted to deploy 10 manifests, I combine those all into a single Helm chart. And that Helm chart would be where I'm, for lack of a better word, packaging them together into a deployable unit.
Right.
And Jesse, do you see it this?
That's how you think about it, yeah.
And how do you, on the Argo side, how does that, something similar?
Oh, sorry about that. Can you give more context on the question? Sorry.
So I want to take 10 manifests and move them from development to a QA cluster. Do you have a logical grouping? Like on the Spinnaker side, they're talking about using a Helm chart to group the manifests, you know, your services, your deployments, your config maps at the Helm level to package them together. What's happening on the Argo side?
Those three environments are considered three separate three applications. So if you have a QA environment and a staging and a prod, it would be a stage, a QA application, a stage application, a prod application. So that's part of a potential use case for app sets, is that you could have a higher level one. Today we don't have, I mean, applications that can assist with that higher level grouping of, like, to represent that collection.
Okay. Okay.
And Isaac with Armory just joined us. Thank you, Isaac. Any thoughts on this topic? I know you're coming in to the middle of a conversation, but
yeah, I'm just catching up right now. Let me kind of listen a little bit more, and then I can probably contribute something more meaningful.
Yeah. So Steve, you want to summarize right now what's in your head? And Isaac and all, we are one of our, I call them our big rocks for the community this first quarter, is to really get the requirements down for understanding this particular use case and adding those configurations into our metadata in our configuration repository. So that's one of the primary reasons for this call. What we'll be doing is we'll put together a requirements document that we'll send out to everybody that was on this call to get some feedback. We'll probably put it in Google Docs so you can respond to it. But Steve, you want to try summarizing right now how you see this particular use case and kind of what an application set is and how we might interface to it?
Right. So the application, from what I understand, is going to be the smallest level of the deployment. In the Spinnaker case, you can combine multiple services together through a Helm chart to do the grouping or packaging of a set of services that need to be deployed as a unit. That would be represented as an application. So both Spinnaker and Argo are both deploying applications, which underlying are just a set of basically Kubernetes manifests, the service, the deployment, and some config maps at that level. And then the need is from both sides, both Argo and Spinnaker, the need is to be able to associate together applications that are associated to each other as a unit. The Argo application set mechanism is being used to help facilitate dynamic data coming into the deployment process. For example, moving from deploying from 5 clusters to 100 clusters. That is where that dynamic data is coming in. But at the end of the day, the application set from the Argo side is still deploying an application, just being pushed in different data at deployment time through the application set control plane. But the higher level that doesn't seem to exist in either solution is the concept of a logical view of an application. How are these applications, or I should say, let's call them a product, a logical view of a product that is going to group together multiple applications and the versions of those applications so we can see how they move through the pipeline from development through QA through production. Is that close?
Yeah, we could grade him if there's anything that we've missed. Jesse, Isaac, Alexander, Henrik, Adam. Any feedback on that summary?
Yeah, I like the product analogy. That's kind of where my head is at. It's not necessarily a tight coupling of deployment steps, but the logical grouping is important. So I like that.
I have a question about what the tangible outcome of the meeting, like what are we looking to do? I came in confused because application set in my mind was always an ArgoCD concept. I thought that was the interest, and I was confused on why is Netflix or Spinnaker interested in application sets.
Well, so it turns out that this problem that application sets addressing isn't unique just to Argo end users. We have customers ourselves that are starting to use what we call an application in some interesting ways. And Jesse, I don't know how much you know about Ortelius, but Ortelius is basically, think about it as a microservice configuration management repository or database. We track and map relationships between microservices and the applications that consume them. And we know we potentially need to have a middle grouping, which would be, we started calling them component sets. So it seemed as if Argo was talking about it in one way. We're all seeing it's like the story about the elephant and the 6 blind men. We wanted to make sure we were all still touching the elephant, even though we're calling it different things. And that's how this conversation got started.
I see.
Gopi, any thoughts from the OpsumX side, what you guys are seeing, or
Isaac, if you have any thoughts?
Or Isaac.
Yeah, can you guys hear me okay? My
Yep.
internet is not great today. Yeah, I'm seeing actually this be a fairly big problem, especially I think on the Spinnaker side, because there is some sort of grouping, but not, I think, grouping in the way that certain customers want it to be grouped. I think we think of microservices in a more pure microservices kind of way, where I think the rest of the world is just now starting to break down their monolith into microservices and define what is a product, define what is those logical groupings. And I think because, and Adam, correct me if I'm wrong here, I think because Netflix was one of the companies that pioneered microservices and had always had pure microservices almost from the beginning of Spinnaker, and never really had so much of a need for this kind of logical grouping to its users because they already had a pretty good understanding of what that would look like. Now, if you think about this in the enterprise or for people who don't have a good grasp of microservices, which is pretty much the entire market, I think a tool like this is really helpful because they're evolving so fast from, you know, one application to 10 applications, and what that means, how do you group it, how do you have the metadata around it, that I think this is a pretty big space or problem that people are running into. And Adam, do you think that's a right assumption that I made with Spinnaker and the comfort with microservices that Netflix had?
I think that's a fair point, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in our view of the relationships, when we talk about microservices and if we get into the hybrid world where you may be deploying, you know, 80% of your application is still in a monolith that's running in a EAR file in some, you know, a JBoss world or WebSphere. That is just another, we don't care about the size of it. We need to know that application is related to these 5 other microservice applications, and that we need to pull that set together as a product view that people can say, you know, I'm going to go test version 10 of this product and it broke. And then you can pop up, open underneath the hood and say, oh, this product is made up of some VM that's running a JBoss part plus some Kubernetes clusters that are running some containers. And that, you know, when this thing broke, which part of the product actually broke underneath the hood. It's kind of the thought process that we have from our side.
Or at least what
Ortelius.
changed. We're tracking the changes over time, and we would be versioning those sets. So we version applications, we version the components, and we would then be versioning the sets and tracking the changes in those sets. Okay,
I've got a question for Jesse, actually, if I can.
Sure.
So it sounds like each of the applications in the application set would be independently deployed. Is that fair to say?
Typically, they are able to be independently deployed, but you also have a higher level object to also facilitate the automation of many application deploys. So the pain point is that, hey, I have 100 clusters and I'm deploying Argo rollouts to all those 100 clusters. I don't want to script a sync 100 times across those 100 clusters. I'd like some other higher level button, or not button, but spec to both facilitate the specifications of those applications and also to logically group them as a higher level deployable unit, so to speak. But I'll stop there. Yeah.
So in the primary use case that you had was to that you're running up against was, I have this application that needs to be redeployed to different environments, being QA, production, and within those, let's say within the production environment, you need to go out to every single region in AWS and, you know, a cluster in every single region. And the application set was going to give you the capability of doing that in one pass instead of scripting it for every single region.
Yeah, I think you can think about it like that. Yeah.
Okay.
So one other clarifying question. So is the application set just logically a bucket of applications, or are you actually adding the logic for like what you're saying? So like the deploy logic would be associated with the application set, and then it would be like applied to everything underneath it.
That's a good question. So one thing to know is that ArgoCD is not, it eschews a pipeline concept. So the way most of our user-based stages or phases that deploy their environments is actually through their pipeline. So actually for at Intuit, we first deploy to like a QA environment and then run tests right against that QA, and then next stage of that pipeline will deploy to the stage and then run some more tests, and then so that piece, there's no pipeline concept in ArgoCD because we expect some external, whether that's Jenkins or something else to do that.
Got it. So your Argo's focused just on deployment to the one stage of the pipeline, and then there's another outside tool that's going to be the orchestration tool.
Exactly. Yeah.
But on the Spinnaker side, Spinnaker has orchestration and the deployment all in a single tool.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's combined. So you'd have that application with different environments set up. So your QA, your staging, your production with the necessary gates in between, and an orchestration that just moves your deployed artifact through that.
Right.
There are two use cases that we are discussing, right? One is that deployment of an application. Here, the application definition being all the services that make up functioning of one application. And then the product view, which is you don't necessarily deploy your database with your application, the database you expect to exist, or a few other services that provide your service requirements to exist. And then you deploy your application from your dev group. And so this is a product view and individual groups application view. This is slightly different. When we're talking about this application deployment, this is a view where we take one group's application set of services that they have with their configuration and actually do a deploy. And the product view is something that you don't deploy as part of your group, but you want to have a view of what makes your entire product come alive.
Right.
And what dependencies exist.
Right. And we
application sets and application. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we're going to have that covered where both use cases would be handled on the Ortelius side as part of that. Now, just to give you just a quick view of how Ortelius would fit into this, in the process of when the deployment actually occurs, and the cluster gets updated, we would want to just get notified that X, Y, and Z got updated in cluster, 25. With that information, we can complete the relationship map and manage those relationships to bring the visibility up from roll it up to the product view saying this product A is in QA and it consists of these parts, and these parts are made up of different, could be VMs or containers, doesn't matter to us, but that's what we're looking at from the use case standpoint.
Okay, we have taken 40 minutes of everybody's time. I want to thank everyone for taking the time to discuss this with us. It's been extremely helpful. We will work on a requirements doc and make sure that we send it out to all so you can see how we summarize this. And from that doc, the Ortelius team will be working on building out additional, basically, areas to store this kind of data as part of our configuration data and our maps and our reporting that we do across all clusters and across all deployment engines. And that is our goal.
And just to let you know, we're not that far off from what we discussed. like Jesse was saying, it's more of a everybody calling this different things the same name that can make things very confusing really quick.
Yes. Yes.
So this definitely helped clarify for us how people think of the world.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate.
I have one question. Can I go?
Yeah.
I had one question. Can I go ahead? Or like,
Yeah.
Go ahead,
for it.
Quick.
like when you speak of application set, so like a particular application can only belong to only one application set, or can be part of other application set as well.
Is that question for our implementation?
Yeah, for you.
Oh,
so did you get the question?
I think so.
Okay.
An application can only belong to one application set. There's actually a ownership reference that we have marked in the application, so that it can only be part of one set. Yeah.
Good question.
If you're interested, we have a Git repo of the spec and its implementation. It's actually going to be part of our next official release. It's been run as a separate controller up until now, but it's being bundled. Upsets are being bundled as our next release of ArgoCD.
Yeah, I read through your spec and looked at your code on how you're implementing the controller, and the part that I was getting tripped up on was what people name things. So that's where today's meeting really came in and helped understand what is an application, what is a deployable unit. Mm-hmm. Those concepts really help solidify what you had in your spec.
Okay.
So is this scenario same for Spinnaker as well, or like is it something different?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Like I had like the question that I asked to you, like is it same for Spinnaker or like?
Yeah. So Spinnaker can you deploy multiple applications from different, I don't know what you call them in Spinnaker, jobs or workflows?
So two dimensions here. I could deploy somebody else's VM inside my application, and kind of it would be namespaced as something belonging to that application. I think if we start talking about a definition of a product, putting my Netflix hat on, depending on if you actually want to be able to look at a product and understand the changes that may be happening to it, and if you want to look reflectively to say like, oh, it was fine here and all of a sudden it broke, I think that definition of a product needs to extend into some services that might not be purely owned by your team. So some of the shared services that would be a member of multiple products. So I would see that. I would certainly a reality for us.
Okay, cool. As
a construct, we don't have this application rigid definition in Spinnaker. Right. That's it.
Right.
Doesn't exist today.
Just as a quick comment with my CD Foundation hat on for a moment, it would be great to also capture some of this discussion and feed it back into the interoperability SIG, as I think this conversation around the different terminology ideally should eventually be documented in their interoperability terminology to try and capture this going forward, because I think what you said there were around how a lot of people talking cross terms for the same thing is what that SIG exists for. So if we can feed that back into that, I think it would be really useful going forward too.
Yeah, I'll make sure that they get a link to this meeting so they can listen in on what we stumbled over on for terminology.
Okay. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Everybody have a good weekend. Thank you so much. Big help. Definitely a big help.
Take care, everybody.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Cheers.